Good evening. This is the Resistance Report. We are now, Tuesday, the 24th of January 2017. I'm glad I got the date right. We are now in the fourth full day of the Trump administration. The sky has not fallen in yet, but there are some cracks. For example, today the Trump administration cleared the way, or indicated it would clear the way, for the Dakota Access Pipeline and also the Keystone XL pipeline. It's interesting. I think Donald Trump, when he talks about America first, he's not talking about Native Americans, obviously. They are not coming first. But also, Donald Trump is intent on becoming the most anti-environmental president in memory. He met with automakers today and basically asked them to create more jobs in the United States and promised that if they did so, he would reduce the environmental so-called burden on them, including all sorts of regulations that they have got to and should adhere to. He also, somehow, if he's going to do that, has got to deal with the state of California. These automakers, one of their legal obligations, if they want to sell cars in California, is to meet environmental regulations in California that are higher than federal standards. I don't know how Donald Trump is going to preempt California environmental rules unless he suddenly no longer actually is on the side of states' rights like California. He also imposed a gag order on the Environmental Protection Agency today. A temporary media blockout. The EPA could not communicate publicly with the press. He basically closed down the EPA, the press room, any communications with the EPA. He's done this for a number of departments now, but the EPA is obviously the biggest. There is also a federal hiring freeze that went into effect. Now, it's interesting because on the one side, Donald Trump is meeting with automakers and he's saying, look, you've got to create more jobs. On the other side, the biggest employer in the United States, which is the federal government, he's putting a hiring freeze, saying, no, you can't hire anybody. And I'll tell you something, the automakers are not going to hire anybody unless it makes financial sense for them to hire additional people. And sales of new cars are flat. They're not going to invest. And how, by the way, is Donald Trump going to overcome enormous pay gap? I mean, in Mexico, for example, the typical Mexican worker at a Mexican auto plant that is related directly or indirectly to sales in the United States gets $6 an hour. The typical American worker at an auto plant gets $26 an hour. That is a big difference. So how is Donald Trump, even if he reduces environmental regulations or health and safety or any other regulations for American workers, how is he going to overcome that difference? The only way, if he's only concerned about jobs, if that's his only concern, if he wants to show that he is creating more jobs, is he's going to actually have to end up reducing wages in the United States. I doubt that that's going to happen. Donald Trump obviously doesn't know exactly what he's doing, or he's involving himself in symbolic acts. He did get a great deal of support from the Rust Belt. That's why he is talking about Rust Belt manufacturing jobs. But he obviously doesn't even know that factories that are back in the United States or factories that remain in the United States have relatively few workers because most of it is automated. Most of those old assembly lines are now filled with robots and numerically controlled machine tools. There are not a lot of jobs there, Donald Trump. Take a look. Go into some of those U.S. manufacturing facilities. The only thing he's going to actually accomplish by reducing the costs for American manufacturers is he's going to improve the profits for American manufacturers. And if he improves the profits for American manufacturers, but he doesn't actually improve the lives of American workers, that's called, remember, trickle-down economics. We've had that before. We also learned today, actually we learned yesterday from a federal judge that Aetna Insurance Company, now again, Donald Trump has great reliance. He really does think that the private sector is the source of everything that is good. Well, that Aetna Insurance Company lied, blatantly lied, when they pulled out of the federal Obamacare exchanges last summer, saying that they were losing money. They were not losing money. It turns out, according to this federal judge who decided to block the merger of Aetna and Humana, that Aetna had threatened the Justice Department and the Obama administration that they would pull out of the exchanges if the Justice Department didn't allow the merger to go forward. In other words, this was just a ploy by Aetna to get permission to merge with Humana. And the Justice Department said no. And this federal judge said no, because that merger would not favor consumers, ordinary Americans, American workers, and actually would end up costing Americans more money. If you follow the direction I am trying to suggest here, it's that the private sector in the United States is about one thing. It is about making money. It's about profits. It's about increasing shareholder returns. And also, not incidentally, increasing the compensation of top executives. We have a public sector that is supposed to worry about the public needs. And those public needs have to do with everything from the environment to the needs of people like Native Americans, to our health and our safety, and even public schools. And what Donald Trump apparently is interested in doing is turning over more and more of what we used to consider the common good, the public interest, to private entities. And those private entities are interested in making money. And so where does that leave us? It leaves us with more and more of a Donald Trumpian oligarchy. Finally, I want to say something about Donald Trump's lies, because one of the biggest lies he's perpetrating, he said it yesterday, again, when he met with leaders of Congress. And today, his press secretary, Sean Spicer, repeated the lie. This big lie is that there was massive voter fraud going on in the 2016 presidential election. Now, George Orwell and others have commented and predicted that if you say a big lie often enough, the public will become confused and start believing it. There is no evidence whatsoever of voter fraud. Massive voter fraud? No. In fact, the only evidence we have is that there were four, F-O-U-R, examples of fraudulent votes. We're not even clear that those were intentional in the 2016 election. So what is Trump and what is his administration trying to do by repeating this lie? Trying to set up in the public's mind the notion that there is a real big problem here having to do with voter fraud. The purpose of which is, if the public believes that there's a big fraud problem, then movements to restrict voting, to impose higher voter ID requirements, more draconian hoops that people have to go through who should be permitted to vote, but who are Democrats or minorities or people who Donald Trump and Republicans don't want to vote, those become more legitimate. We must not allow big lies like this to be told and accepted. Those members of Congress who were at that lunch yesterday, congressional leaders who were there when Donald Trump lied, they should have come right out of that lunch and said to the news cameras, he lied. They should have said it to his face. Don't lie like that. Members of the press today, at the news briefing with Sean Spicer, when Spicer repeated that lie, they should have said, no, there is no evidence. You cannot say that to the American people. So in this, the fourth day of the Trump administration, we have a man who is not only turning his back on the environment, making deals with automakers that make no economic sense at all, and that are basically, to the extent that they will be followed up, or trickle-down economics. and also continues to perpetuate dangerous lies about our democratic process. Not encouraging. That's tonight's report. We'll see you tomorrow.